Bombshell Brunches, where your hosts Raquel Rudenberg and Christina Lau sip and spill with badass babes every Tuesday morning. Clap to start? I don't know.
That's right. I said that one. Yep.
Okay.
Okay, great. And it is recording. Good morning, everybody, our wonderful bombshells out there. I am so happy to welcome back our first recurring guest star. Tamara Adilman has been a therapist in private practice in Vancouver BC for over 25 years. She specializes in relationship and individual therapy, which is why we have Tamara back today. She has dedicated her working life to help people discover who they are and to reach their potential. I can personally attest to this in some contexts. I know that Tamara has worked at places that I have worked as well and changed and transformed countless lives. She works with clients who are facing grief, loss, anxiety, depression, as well as with couples and family members who seek to heal their relationships. She believes deeply that people can and do change, and her life's work is to help clients find their path towards personal transformation. I think that is the perfect. You know what? I couldn't have written a better bio, and I'm good at writing bios.
We just talked about this.
So welcome back. Welcome.
Oh, I thank you for that absolutely beautiful introduction. And
she's so good at them.
And she's so good at them. And it's so nice to see you both. It really is. Congratulations on your podcast. And I'm excited about talking about relationships today. Relationships during the pandemic. What a topic.
I wanted you back on here for so long.
Well, Raquel, I am all yours, and let's talk.
Yes. The words I want to hear. Oh my gosh, we have so many questions for you. We also put out a bunch of questions to our listeners so that they could send us their questions in. And then we kind of threw everything into 3 different themes. So we have relationships during the pandemic, really specifically towards people who are living together, being single during the pandemic, because this is a year of, relatively low amounts of dating, or any other forms of single life, like maybe even just glowing up yourself. And then, I had to throw in there like long distance / quarantine. So people who are either long distance or just in situations, maybe they have their elderly parents at home or they can't really see each other as much. So I have a billion questions for you, and we'll try to get to as many as we can during this time. But I think one of the top ones that I've been playing around with and hearing people talk about is working from home, living at home, working out at home, being with your significant other at all times of the day, and how do you create space for each other? Because how do you be yourself even, right? Like, I don't know. How are people doing this?
Isn't this the question? I've been thinking about this in particular a lot because I'm starting to really hear from folks that it is becoming really taxing. And what I would have said at the beginning of this experience, just a little under a year ago, and what I would say now is actually quite different. So in the beginning, it was very much about, how do people live together in harmony? How can they create more connection? And now it's how do people get some space from each other? Exactly. So that's an interesting thing to think about.
Stay together by staying apart.
Stay together by staying apart. Oh, that's a quote for the ages, isn't it? So there's a few things that I would say, and I'm so curious to hear what the two of you think about this as well. What I would begin with is this. We do know that we need some space and separation for relationships to thrive. As you have just said, Raquel, you know, and I mean, I know that you have listeners from all around the world, but I will talk about what it's like in Vancouver, one of the most expensive cities in the world, which means people tend to live in small spaces because it's just so darned expensive to live here, but so amazing. So people make do by living in small spaces, which means couples can be living in a studio or a one-bedroom apartment. And pre-pandemic, people were going to work, or one person was working from home. Now we may have two people working from home in a small space, not able to see other people except themselves. And how are you not going to drive each other crazy and get on each other's nerves? And so what's been coming up for me, because people are definitely struggling on so many levels at this point in the pandemic, and we can talk about that in a few minutes. Is it that people have spent too much time together, or is it relationship issues? Would people be going through what they're going through had they had a more, quote, normal life? So the question is, how do people do it? And I will say that I think people have to be having some very intentional conversations about taking time apart and knowing that that's a healthy thing, and not thinking, oh, if you want to be on your own, something's wrong with the relationship. Going for a walk alone instead of with your partner all the time. You know, one person working in the bedroom and one in the kitchen table instead of both at the kitchen table for, you know, hours on end. Going for a walk with a friend without a partner, if you're allowed to do that wherever you live, depending on the restrictions. So being able to have some conversations that this is a healthy thing. We're not meant to spend all our time together.
Tam, do you have a lot of people, like, just in terms of a blanket thought, are there a lot of people who have a preconceived notion that you should be spending a lot of time together? Because I didn't grow up thinking that. Is that a common thing, that people are like, oh, we should be doing everything together, otherwise we're not compatible? Is that a common misconception?
I would say to a certain extent that's true, but whenever we make generalizations, there's just as many folks who say, no, I don't think that.
Right.
So
Yeah.
yes, that is a common misconception, but there's going to be lots of people like you, Christina, who didn't grow up or think that that is healthy. What's happening though during this time is it's something that it's actually being forced on us, whether we think it's a good thing or not, because there's just so few options.
Right.
If we're working and living in the same space, because, you know, folks can't go to their workplaces.
How could you position that? How could you position that with the person that you're there with? What kind of verbiage could you use?
Yeah, what's the conversation?
What does the conversation look like?
I think the conversation looks something like this: acknowledging that you're getting on each other's nerves and that you need to have a little more space together. And so maybe, how do couples plan to do things together and have space together, and also plan to have time apart, even if they're in the same space? Maybe one person, you know, is doing their work in their headphones and the other person is cooking or talking to a friend on Zoom, and it's okay to be doing that. You don't have to interact. You know, I've been talking to couples who, for the first time in their relationship, by the way, this sounds so simple, is they read or they watch Netflix or whatever they're doing separately in the same room, and it's okay. They don't have to be interacting. Nobody's mad at each other. So some of this is very simple, but it needs to be talked about.
Yeah.
Now, planned time together, I think, can actually be done in a very constructive way. I think now's the time to work on a relationship in a way that you maybe haven't been able to before. Get an audiobook on relationships, listen to it together, talk about it together. You know, plan some time once a week. Let's have a date night instead of it seeping into everything. So my point is planning some time together to do some things that are productive, that will help you grow as a couple, take a cooking course together. But I think there's a lot of couples who really have a lot of stuff to look at. And, let's face it, therapy is not for everyone. I'm not a proponent that everybody should be in therapy, but there's so many fantastic relationship books and audiobooks. Why don't couples do those together?
What are some of your favorite ones? Did I
Well,
just stop you, Raquel? Were you just
Yeah,
about
it
to
was
say the
perfect. You're
same?
reading my mind. It's great.
Well, my favorite one and the classic, of course, is Getting the Love You Want by Harville Hendrix.
Yeah.
That is the most comprehensive book on relationships that was written for the public. He's the one who developed a kind of way of living and therapy called imago therapy. Oprah's favorite therapist, if anybody cares. I have a lot of respect for Oprah. I think when she had her show, he was on her show more than 17 times. Great, great book, Getting the Love You Want. Fantastic book by Sue Johnson, which is called Hold Me Tight. Those would be the two that I would be suggesting right now. And if you are, and I know I might be jumping ahead, but if you are a single person living in quarantine, another fantastic book, which has a workbook, if you're on your own and you want to get ready for the next relationship, look at what issues have come up for you in the past that you don't want to do over, and that would be Keeping the Love You Find.
Same author.
Also Harville Hendrix. He has a number of books with similar titles, but that's the one he wrote for individuals, which is fantastic because it's a really comprehensive workbook where you look at your own issues in relationship and sort them through so you're better able to be in relationship next time.
That's amazing. And I think you kind of answered a couple of my other questions as well, like how do you keep the spark alive as part of it, right? How do you put time in your relationship when you feel like you're putting all of your time in your relationship? You feel like you never have time away. So that's really good. So it's clear boundaries. It's creating set activities that you can do together, and then having really like set time that you can have apart.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's, yeah.
And I want to pick up on one word you just said, Raquel, that I love, spark. Spark. Can I mention one more book before we move on that is absolutely essential that I forgot about? And that is the classic book by Esther Perel. You're going to love this title if you don't know it, which is called Mating in Captivity.
Yeah.
And it's a fabulous book about how in a long-term relationship you can stay intimately and sexually connected. Yeah. Mating in Captivity. Isn't that the best?
That's a great title.
It's on my list.
Great. So those would be the books that I would suggest for couples. And I also really am a big believer in audiobooks right now because couples can hang out in bed and just listen and talk about what they're listening to. You don't have to be, it doesn't have to be more work. Man, we're working too hard. You don't have to sit and read a book and then your partner reads the same book. Just listen to it. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
So the spark, can I just say spark is so important, and spark is about newness. Spark is about fun. Spark is about mystery. Spark is not about seeing the same person every day, day in, day out, in your sweatpants, not looking your best, not feeling your best. So spark is make some time to do some fun stuff that's a little different. And I believe you can have very romantic dinners and evenings at home with the same person. Order some fancy takeout, put some music on, change the lighting, dress up a little bit. One of the greatest things for couples to do is to talk about what it was like when they were falling in love. That's a great aphrodisiac. People love to talk about when they first met and the early days. So what we're talking about is just thinking outside of the box a little bit to make special time still happen when time doesn't really change right now.
And those sound like really good practices for all the time. Like, yes. I'm thinking, sometimes you just get into the grind and you're so busy and you're home and you're exhausted because you've just been working nonstop before all we did was stay at home. And then too, it can be really hard to dress up and do something different. And, you know, you're just one day kind of goes into the next. So this is maybe just even a really good time to build habits and practices that are really good for your relationship.
100%. 100%. And I'll add one other piece to that, and that is 3 words: let it go. Let it go. We are so focused on the minutia and the things that bug us about our partner, and this has been magnified during the pandemic. And I think this idea of, is it really that important? Do we need to dramatize this? I don't want to minimize conflict. I don't want to minimize miscommunication and disconnection between couples. But so much of what is happening now is people need to let things go and increase positivity and decrease criticism, decrease defensiveness, and be able to live more with appreciation, because we kind of forget to appreciate our partners, but we're very happy to criticize them and point out what we're disappointed with. I believe there needs to be a big shift in this regard.
I don't know what you're talking about, Tam.
What's that all about?
What do you possibly mean?
Right.
Yeah, it's actually interesting what you're saying, because I was thinking last week, I've been ruminating. I'm living, by the way, by myself, so I have a lot of time to think.
Mm-hmm.
And a different country than my significant other, so I really am quite alone. I have lots of time. Poor me.
I really am quite alone.
I am. Me and my many personalities. But I've had a lot of time to think about, you know, different things that come up in relationships or not in relationships. But one of the things that came up for me was not wanting your partner to fail. And I was thinking about that, and I was like, when you don't allow your partner to make mistakes, and maybe they're not even mistakes, when you're trying to like over control their actions because you think that could be a mistake. And I was thinking about that, like, you're stealing their failures. And failures are so important. Like, that's how you grow. So by that, you're either stealing an opportunity because maybe they know something you don't, or you're stealing their failure, which is their opportunity to grow. And I was really thinking about that because I see that so often, especially with my female friends who really want to, I don't know if it's like a nurturing thing, but they really want to like take care of their significant other and not let them have those lows. So I thought that was kind of an interesting thing when you're talking about being critical of someone else. It might not just be critical, but it might be kind of twisting something that might be nurturing or whatever.
So that they foresee, a partner may foresee, well, if you do this, then you may not be very happy with yourself, so don't do this, and can become kind of controlling instead of allowing people their own experience to fail or make a mistake or whatever they're going to do to honor that. Yeah. Well, one of the, you know, the most difficult aspects of relationships, we all know, is differences. You know, we love it when we're the same, love the same movies, agree on the same restaurants, think the same, everything's the same. Everybody loves that. It's not real life. So what I think what you're talking about is that when people have different paths, different perspectives, how to allow those to coexist instead of you've got to be like me, or don't do that because it might not be the right thing. Allowing people to be themselves. This is the greatest gift in a relationship.
And I think what you're saying about the differences is so important. And it's such a difficult navigation, especially with the pandemic. We had one person message in talking about how they have, now I don't know if I'm going to say this properly, so please correct me. But she said that she has anxious attachment style and her partner does not. So dealing with that, especially during the pandemic, they're in Toronto, so they've been hit pretty hard, and also very small housing units where you're together all the time, and they're both working from home. So different attachment styles, how people can navigate through that. I don't know if you have any tips on that.
It was a great book, super, also an easy to read book called Attached that explains attachment styles a lot of people have been reading. So that's another book that folks might want to know about. Well, I think we all know that the levels of anxiety have really increased amongst many, many people. Anxiety is at an all-time high. So if you're already a little bit of an anxious person and you are now going through the pandemic, there's a lot of anxieties that you may feel that you didn't even know you had before. And some of this may come up in your relationship in terms of, your partner, going off to work to start to go back to their office, and you're anxious about that. Or when the pandemic is over, is this relationship going to continue? To the minutia of anxieties day to day. And, I think for many of us during this time, we really do need to be practicing ways of dealing with our anxiety and managing it better. And I'm a big believer in mindfulness apps that help us learn to regulate ourselves, because what tends to happen in relationship, unfortunately, is when one person is quite anxious, they look to their partner to take care of it, to make it better. And the partner, they tend to get together with people who tell them what to do and give them just do this. We all know these people, right? I just want you to listen to me. Why are you giving me advice and telling me what to do? Happens all the time, right? And so we do need to learn some self-management techniques, and know this will come to an end. I think we're forgetting that. It will. It is going to get better. The last time we all got together, we talked about seasonal depression. Well, we're in it now, people. This is it.
Oh, yes.
Boy, are we ever.
We knew this was going to happen, and it's happening.
Yes. Thanks to you, Tam.
That's right.
We're both doing all right.
Yeah. Oh, good. I'm glad. But it's a tough time of year anyway. It's gray. It's cold. Now we're disconnected, and we don't know when it's going to end. We have to know that it is, and continue to be vigilant, because it is going to come to an end where we can connect again. But anxiety relief, anxiety management is huge right now.
Relief anxiety management. Can you explain that a little bit?
Well, so what I'm saying is that we need to have strategies and skills to deal with our anxieties. And there are many. And that's not what we're going to talk about today, but I'll just give a couple of quick tips. We do know that what makes anxiety worse is our thoughts, don't we? Anxiety is very connected to negative thinking patterns.
Yeah, fuck those guys.
Exactly. Fuck those guys. 100%, Christina. And when we start feeling anxious and we're in our head, the only thing that is going to help is to interrupt it. And so when I'm talking about dealing with anxiety, it's finding some ways to challenge yourself, let yourself know that you're going to be okay, reaching out to a friend. Exercise is critical. Going for a walk, listening to music, just getting out of that moment, and then learning mindfulness techniques to deal with some of what's happening in your body. That's kind of the simple answer to that, although it, of course, is more complicated.
I definitely think going outside is a really big one. I've been really lucky here because in Amsterdam, it's actually been quite blue, like lots of blue skies, blue in a good way. So the sun is out, it's cold, but the sun is out, which is very backwards to what I'm used to being a
Mm.
Vancouverite my whole life. And so that's been really, really nice. I just try to get out every single day, get out for a bit of a walk and get that blue sky and tiny bit of vitamin D and you're all bundled up to the into your eyes, but so I think that does really, really help. And I think with what you're saying about setting those boundaries, getting some space from each other, that getting dressed, getting out of your sweatpants
Absolutely.
makes a big difference too. So
Yeah.
that's really good. And so let's navigate into singles world, because I think you work with people who are single as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I'm not single, but tell me what's going on in the world of singles right now. How are people feeling? This is a year. I mean, I've talked to some people and it really ranges how people are feeling, of course. But I imagine also, depending on their age, maybe they're feeling like they've lost a year of finding that significant other, especially if they're close to wanting children, something like that, especially for the females. That can be really difficult. Meeting people obviously is really difficult. I'm imagining it's slowing down, or maybe not. Maybe it's going the other way. I don't actually know. So what are you experiencing with people that you're talking to?
Well, the reality is people have lost a year. That's true. And by the time we're in a place where we can regain some normal activities and way of life, it's going to be a lot more than a year. I think this is the reality we need to accept and not pretend it's not. This is true. People have lost a year. And it's very tough. I'm not going to sugarcoat it and say, oh, just do this and this and this, and it's going to be great. You'll get through.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is a test, people. This is a test for all of us. And if you are single and you're an introvert, you are having a very good year. If you are on your own and you do not want to be, and you would like to meet somebody because you want to have a significant other, this is one of the greatest challenging times of your life, no question. Especially as you say, Raquel, if you would like to meet somebody serious, you want to think about having a family, you want to find your soulmate. So the reality is, it's important to accept this, but it is going to come to an end. And so what do you do in the meantime? I think there are some silver linings in this. Courtship, if I can use that term, because I think it's such a sweet term, really has changed. It has slowed down. And for some people, that's a good thing, because you really get to know each other. You can't start sleeping together and hooking up right away. I mean, I guess you could if that's what you choose, but generally people are not doing that. And so people are still meeting on dating apps and going for walks and slowing it down. And I know one person who met somebody during the pandemic, and it was going so slow. They were able to realize the chemistry wasn't there. And they ended up ending it before it got to a place where it would have been a more painful end. That was a great gift to this person. So I thought that was really cool.
I'm watching this show on Netflix, and they talk about, it's set in the Victorian era, and they promenade. And I just love when they're like, shall we promenade? And I love promenading.
Are you watching Bridgerton?
I'm watching Bridgerton.
Of course she is.
Which is a fabulous show, by the way.
It's so I had just finished narrating an audiobook all in an American accent, and I came home that night and I was like, I need something different. And I was like, oh, they're British. And then I put that on and I was like, oh, okay.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
Promenading. Wonderful. Promenade.
Wouldn't it be nice to go back to promenading?
Yeah, except not
Wearing
all
something
of the
fabulous.
other awful things. Yes,
Yeah.
wearing something fabulous, but being able to breathe at the same time.
Exactly.
And better teeth. Come on.
Right.
Like
Right.
a dentist.
Yeah. But we digress.
We digress. So as I was saying before, I think it's a really interesting time for people to get ready to be in relationship again. Because for those folks who want to be there, this might be the time to look at themselves. So that's where a terrific book like Keeping the Love You Find comes in, where you actually look at your growing up, your life, how you want to do things differently, what issues come up for you. So I think that's a wonderful thing.
Tam,
Mhm.
can I ask if do you suggest reading, because I've read Getting the Love You Want, do you suggest one before another, or it doesn't really matter? It just depends on your life context, where you're at.
It does, but Keeping the Love You Find, what I love about that book is because there's so many exercises, it really does focus on your own individual growth.
I see.
Whereas
So, yeah.
Getting the Love You Want focuses more on your relationship with an intimate partner.
I say it because I've discovered so much about myself reading that book. And Getting the Love You Want was a huge, it just shifted so much for me. And I read that book by myself, like, so
for sure.
yeah.
Love,
so that's
wonderful.
I just wondered if there was one before the other that would be more useful or not. Not really.
No,
Okay.
they're both wonderful. But if you are single and wanting to get ready for a relationship, definitely read Keeping the Love You Find first. And the other thing that we do know, because it's winter in so many parts of the world, if you're listening to this and you're living in Australia or New Zealand, well, let's not even go there. I just talked with my friend in New Zealand yesterday, and I'm like, you don't wear masks? You hug people? What?
Yeah, because the Prime Minister is Jacinda Ardern. Like,
exactly. It's like, what? But my point is, as the weather changes, there's more opportunities to hang out with people. I mean, we're in North America where it's freezing or it's gray and rainy. Unless you live in somewhere in the southern states, and they have their own issues with the pandemic, obviously, where it's terribly unsafe. So what I would say is this: hang in there, people. The isolation will come to an end. Do your work, slow things down, be really ready for a relationship, and focus on yourself right now. Yeah. And it's hard. Just acknowledge that too. Sometimes people blame themselves, Raquel. They're like, why aren't I doing better? How come I'm so anxious? Why can't I meet someone and fall in love? What's the matter with my relationship? Instead of realizing everybody is suffering.
Yeah. So I think that actually leads to a really big question that we've been also hearing recently, which is how to tell, especially during the pandemic where everything is so sensitive, if the relationship is suffering because of the pandemic and because of the closeness, or if because it's just not the right relationship. How do you navigate that?
Isn't that the $1 million question? That is, what I will say is, it is very possible we will see relationships ending after the pandemic in a way that perhaps is going to surprise us. And I definitely don't mean to be a Debbie Downer, but I think people are hanging on, and especially if you're living together. So to those people who are really struggling, I say get some help. As I said, start working through a book together, get it together, grow up sometimes, stop acting like a 3-year-old, appreciate your partner and see what's possible. But for some folks where it is not going to continue, but they're kind of stuck during the pandemic, it may end when it's over. We may see more of that. I don't know. I mean, everyone said, oh, there's going to be all these pandemic babies and all these people are going to be together and always together and having sex, and we're going to see all these babies. And maybe I work with people and I have a very skewed perspective, but quite frankly, people are trying to avoid each other right now. It's enough time together. So we will see. And it's a tough time to end a relationship right now, especially if you're living together. That's for sure. So it is important to stay safe and not drink too much and get in fights. And this is the time where we're seeing an increase of violence. So there's some very big concerns, no question.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that. But yeah, like drug use, alcohol use, especially being trapped inside all the time.
Well, you know, the joke, and I don't know if you've heard this, is during this pandemic, people are either becoming a chunk, a hunk, or a drunk. And sometimes a few of those at the same time. I mean, we see all these people working out and they're in their home videos and they've got their weights. And then we've got the people who are just, you know, it's
just a
makes
chunk?
sense. Yeah, they're just the
cookie.
comfort. I'm like,
donut.
Damn right. I'm bummed. I'm sad. I'm lonely. And then there's the ones who are like, you know, 3 p.m. Can I open the wine yet?
Can we be all three?
Yes.
I mean, asking for a friend.
You can be all of them.
I wouldn't know, but
of course not. But you could be. Theoretically, you could be.
For the friend of a friend.
Yeah, for the friend. Cool.
So what are some tips for okay, I want to split this in half, like extroverts, introverts, and we kind of touched on that earlier. I mean, I know for myself I'm an extrovert, so there's definitely parts of me that I feel like I'm my best self after I've had a night out with friends, you know, after I've had some dancing or a bombshell brunches. And that is like, I come home on a high, the best me. I am there for everybody. When I don't have that, I'm so happy that my poor significant other is not here, because when I don't have that, I am not nearly as happy-go-lucky. So what can some extroverts do? And introverts, you talked about, they might be very happy, but then
I'm an introvert. So this is what, and I wanted to just clarify, because a lot of people mistakenly think that I'm super, super extroverted, and they mistakenly define introverts and extroverts. So I do want to ask Tam to give your understanding of introversion versus extroversion, because I will say I go out more than most people, or I used to socialize more than most people, and I am exhausted at the end, and I am tired. And my favorite time to recharge, when I feel truly energized, is when I'm with a person that I love, when I'm with one person, having an individual conversation, having a walk with a friend or whatever. That is energizing to me. So before we go into that next bit, I want Tam's thought on introversion versus extroversion.
Well, I think you've just defined it perfectly. I don't even know if I have to add to that. The reality is, introverts, it takes more energy to go out, and it isn't as natural of a feeling. I can't wait to go out again and see people and go dancing. I can do it. And once I'm there, I may enjoy it. A true extrovert is, wow, can we go out yet? I'm so excited. You know, I know what I'm going to wear. I've been thinking about it all week. I can't wait to, do that. But it's like anything in life. Life is not black and white 100%. It just isn't. So the introvert is going to need more time to themselves, or as Christina says, with one person, to just recharge, because they get fatigued from so much interaction. But the extrovert sometimes likes time to themselves too.
Yeah.
So it's more kind of like the amount of time. And for extroverts, what I have been finding is they have really been connecting with people who they love and care about, on Zoom, on FaceTime, when they go for a walk, as you were saying, Raquel, you go for walks, do it while you're talking to a friend, and then you get, you're by yourself, you're walking, you're getting exercise, you're checking out Amsterdam, which is where you're living right now, which is so cool. And you're, talking to a friend. I was talking to somebody the other day, they were having a cocktail party with a bunch of girlfriends that was, starting in an hour. This isn't the first time they've done this during the pandemic. It's a pretty regular thing.
Mm.
People are having dance parties together,
Yep, I
you
went to
know,
one. I did. I
Did
went
you?
to my friend's. Yeah. Oh, I danced so
on
much.
Zoom,
Yeah,
right?
it
You
was
can do it.
fun.
It's
Yeah,
like you do it in your own home, but you're all together.
pajama party.
It's fabulous. We had some friends who we were going to have a Zoom dinner. Well, an hour before the dinner, I didn't know this was going to happen. They came by and dropped a cocktail thing off with everything to make cocktails. And then when we started our Zoom dinner, they taught us how to make this fancy cocktail and they had dropped everything off.
Stop.
I
That
love
would
that.
never have happened
I
had
love
this
that.
not, so things are just, and sometimes people are having deeper conversations with each other,
Mm.
Hmm.
on Zoom in a way they wouldn't have. So some of these cocktail parties, yeah, in this, I've talked to somebody recently and they're like, yeah, we've had a couple glasses of wine and we talk in a way that we never would have talked before
Hmm.
about ourselves, how we're really doing. Because we're all doing it together instead of at a party, there's a lot of people, but you're kind of talking to one person at a time. And often it's a little bit superficial.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
So these are some things that are happening that I think we do have to really acknowledge and appreciate as more meaningful connections with
Mm.
people.
It was
Yeah.
interesting because Chinese New Year just passed, and
Mhm.
I had my first Bai Sun, which is like the celebrations to uh, I think it's mostly the deities, but it can be, you can do celebrations for the ancestors. You're welcoming in the new year. And my aunt, we did it all on Zoom, and my aunt walked us through the history. And my aunt in France was there. Our family
So
members were. It
cool.
was so amazing, and it was hilarious because my auntie had to rig it up because you burn things a lot of in this culture, you burn a lot of paper,
Mhm.
right? So she's like moving things so that the fire alarm doesn't go off. And there's kids running around on one of the other Zooms like trying to pay attention. You've all got to eat, and then you sit and you eat together. And a lot of that time I can't be over there where they are. I couldn't be even if it wasn't a pandemic. So it's really nice to acknowledge that. I think that's a really cool. You can start some new rituals. You know.
Absolutely, it's beautiful, and if we are talking about couples a little bit too, is you can have dinner parties with another couple,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm.
you're all eating at the same time, and you're perhaps having a glass of wine if that's what you do, and you're on Zoom. So it is pretty
Mm-hmm.
amazing how people are making this work, because we are social beings, we are wired to connect, so we are finding ways to cope.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think it is a leveler. Like, I think what you're saying about people being more open, it's also, we're globally going through this. We're hearing people talk about what everyone is going through globally. And so I think it's dropped that wall a little bit for people to start talking about things that maybe before was taboo, like just different emotional things or how they're feeling or to check in with themselves. And thankfully, I think a lot of employers and things are encouraging that, which is really healthy. And I don't know, but never really happened before. Like maybe rarely, but most
Mhm,
companies would not have encouraged you to
mhm.
open up about your feelings.
Absolutely. You are so right about that. And I do think that's an important thing to acknowledge. I can't even tell you the number of my clients who work for companies who have said that during the pandemic, there are now mandates for mental health. You're allowed to take an hour and have a counseling call or
Mm.
talk to your coach. And it's actually encouraged now. So it is an interesting time in that way, isn't it? I think we are
Mm-hmm.
sharing our vulnerability, issues around our mental health in a way that we haven't. Of course, not for everyone, but that is an opportunity for sure.
Mm.
So let's dig into long distance or separated partners. Maybe it's not super long. Maybe they're even, I think, because in BC right now, you guys are on a pretty decent lockdown, right? So you
We
can't,
are. Yes, we
yeah,
are
so like
locked
if
down
someone's
here.
on the island, you're not really
No,
supposed to be going across, or
no.
even maybe in, I don't know, like Kicking Horse or something, if people are kind of in different areas of the province, you're not really supposed to be crossing over. So, and
That's
then again,
correct.
like we talked about with older parents or whatever, not wanting to put anyone else at risk if you have people around you. What about those people who are not able? So the opposite, they're not able to spend the time with their significant others in the way that they were used to.
I think they're having a lot more screen sex.
That's great.
I actually think that's what's happening. I think that people are living on their screens.
Hmm.
And used to be that if you were to have, for example, a FaceTime call with a partner, it would be, an hour or 20 minutes. What's going on now? It's just on for hours. And it's like you're hanging out together, doing your
Mm.
own thing, but being together.
So,
Yeah.
okay. Stocks in remote sex toys are going up. Make note, anyone who's trying to invest.
You heard it here. You heard it here. Um, yes. Now, the other thing that's happening, which I think you alluded to, is some people who have been in long distance relationships because they can work from home have actually ended up
Hmm.
being together. And what was long distance is not anymore.
Yeah.
And so they're having the opportunity to live together and be together in a way that they haven't. So that'll be interesting to learn about too as this continues. Um, but that is very challenging when you're already not able to see somebody. And now if you used to, if I know people who one person lives in Toronto and works in Toronto, but they would actually fly back and forth and see each other 4 to 6 weeks. That
Hmm.
they were able to do that. And another person, well, the other person lives in Vancouver, for example, that's not happening. So it's
Mm.
really very challenging. And once again, I think everybody's just relying on their screens and hoping this is going to come to a place where we can pause soon enough.
Hmm.
And we don't know when that will be.
So, do you have any tips on how people can create intimate moments? Doesn't need to be sexual, but intimate, um, on screens, because it does seem a little bit like something you have to get used to, because there's that barrier to having, you don't have the physical interaction, which I think is such a starter. So
Mm-hmm.
how do you create those intimate moments, and especially on the emotional side, I think too. Like I do think on the, well, I guess it depends on the relationship, but I think on the more sexual side it might be easier, but on the emotional side it's really easy to disconnect too and make it more surface level. So how do you kind of dive deep and keep that connection strong?
Well, I think it's all of what we've been talking about, which is about consciousness being intentional. So perhaps you do what we talked about before. You work through a book together, or you get
Mm-hmm.
a couples game, where there's different levels of questions. It's, like what's your dream for your life when you're by the time you're 40? Or, what are reasons not to have children as
Mm.
opposed to not just have children? What was your first dog and what were your memories from that? So the point being, having more intimate conversations. And there are some different games for couples and things you can do. There's a terrific book that comes with flashcards, which I think is called, oh, I'm so sorry. I don't like bringing something up and then I can't remember the name. If I Knew That You Loved Me, or something
Okay.
like that. I think it's if I Knew You Loved Me. And it's just like every page is a question or a sentence. And then you would just open up the book or get the flashcards and just read that out and have a conversation about it. So what I think you're talking about is emotional intimacy.
Is it
Mm-hmm.
is it Before I Knew You Loved Me? No, that's not it. That doesn't look like it. I'm trying to look it up right now.
If I knew you loved me,
If you really knew me, would you still like me? If you really loved me. Oh, there's so many. There's so many.
We'll
We'll
add it
find
to
it.
the
it can
notes.
be any of them. They're all good.
Yeah.
But the point, being is intentional as you make it happen. Don't just expect like, oh, we got nothing to talk about. Let's talk
Mm.
about this tonight.
Mm-hmm. So it's
Mm-hmm.
almost like setting up a date night around
Yes.
these games or topics or
Yes.
ideas.
Yes. Or watch a TED Talk together. Watch one of the Esther Perel TED Talks. Or watch, Brene Brown has that fabulous Netflix hour and a
I've been
half. To
hearing
read
lots.
that together, watch it
Call
together,
to
and then
Courage.
talk about it. Called to Courage. So there's so many things like that.
Hmm.
Watching a romantic comedy together and then talking about that, things like that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds good for even singles
Mm-hmm.
who are starting to date online but maybe aren't wanting to meet up with people too quickly, as a good way to start getting to know someone and see if it's worth in this pandemic time to take it to the next level.
For sure. Mm-hmm.
Especially, it kind of slows it down, but it adds a really good base. It goes after the courtship.
Courtship, right?
Comes back around.
If there's one thing that we're learning during this time, it's to wait. Not a skill that we've actually been very good at, because everything has been so immediate, in this generation for all of us. And now it's like we're learning to wait.
Mm-hmm. Do you see women taking more of a step forward in roles of courtship? This is a random question that popped into my mind.
It is such an interesting question. I don't know how to answer that. We're going to have to think about that. I don't want to say yes or no because it's not coming to me. I'm not sure that I have actually been asking that question or thinking about it. What do you think? Do you think women are taking more of an active role?
When I think of my girlfriends, I do. But then when I talk to my guy friends, they don't seem to think so. So I don't actually know the right answer either. But I am seeing my female friends in my age group who are definitely far more intentional about who they're dating. Whereas before, I think it was a lot of waiting for a guy to make the first step. And then you're really only choosing from the pool of guys who make the first step instead of being able to choose from a big pool of people or women or whatever sexual orientation. But yeah, so that is something that I've been hearing from the female side, but I am hearing the argument from the male side. So I don't actually don't know.
And in straight relationships, perhaps that is true. I think in queer relationships, obviously that would be very different. So this is something I don't know.
Well, listeners, maybe you know. You can message us. Tell us what your story is.
I think the through line that I hear throughout the whole thing is we're all being forced into discovering and executing new ways of communicating with each other, like in a much richer way, because we're, when you close your eyes and your other senses become a little bit stronger, well, the world's closed. So we now have to create, I think my personal opinion is that we've had to create other ways to dig deeper. And I think sometimes, with relationships in general, whether they're intimate, whether they're friends, whether they're family, we're being pressed through this really difficult sensory reduced kind of funnel right now. And how we respond to it, we've got a guest that's we've had a guest that's amazing, Jillian, who was a brain cancer survivor, talking about how you have to learn how to cope and communicate and understand yourself and understand your own body and your own mind. And it's not going to work. Not what works for one couple is not going to work for another couple. What works for you is going to work for you. And it's about really communicating that to the other person and to yourself, I think. So
I really think that's so well said, Christina. And what I would add when you use the word communicate is truly the piece in communication that we need to remember is the most important, is not the talking, it's the depth of listening. We need to listen and accept that this is who we have chosen to be with, and to try and meet their needs as they should be doing with us. And that this is what makes a relationship healthy and long lasting, is the depth of listening and understanding.
And that's so uncomfortable. Because one of my mantras, I have 2 mantras for this year, and one of them is to let go of me. And one of the big things that I realized, I have a lifetime of thinking, well, what is this person doing for me? How are they being for me? And I don't think that that's an unhealthy way of thinking, but for me in particular, what it did was not give me enough space to honor them. And so I have to be more intentional in this year to let go of the me in an equation and how someone's words are impacting me, and spend more time listening to what is actually happening to that person. And that depth of listening, that reframe for me has been it's been a very uncomfortable process, because I thought in my mind that I was a pretty good listener, but I wasn't. 100% not.
Yes. Well, and the way you just described that is truly what a relationship is. Why are we in relationship? If we're in relationship because we just want our needs met, it's going to be very me focused. And I'll tell you, it's probably not going to work. But if we're in relationship because we want to be we focused, and we want to collaborate, and we want to show up for our partner, and they're doing the same, we'll actually get our needs met without demanding. So it is, as you say, it is a reframe. Mm-hmm.
That makes me think of Barack and Michelle Obama. I always look at them and I just think they're like the most amazing couple in the world. They just seem so supportive. My grandparents are like that. I ask them all the time, like they still walk down the street holding hands, and when they could, they were out in Amsterdam bicycling everywhere, but they live in Canada. And they're so adorable. And I've asked them so many times thinking maybe I'll get a different answer. I'm like, so how, like, what's the secret? What's the secret? And that was really what it boils down to. They said, take it one day at a time. And they both had the same goals. Like they worked together. They're a team. Yeah. It's, seems so simple, but simple things aren't always easy.
Simple isn't always easy. In fact, that is true. So much that is simple is not easy, but it doesn't mean that we should, it means we should still be doing it. We should be really risking and focusing on what's hard, because this is life. This is life in relationships. They're not meant to be easy. We know that.
They're meant to be worth it.
They're meant to be worth it.
Ooh, yes. It's a good one.
Yes.
Oh, we're just dropping them right at the end.
This is like, boom, good. This is good.
Well, Tam, thank you. I can't tell you how wonderful it is to sit down with you and to share so much incredible knowledge with our audience, with our friends out there. So thank you, Tam.
Well, thank you once again for having me. It's a pleasure. It's really, I love how you do this. We're just having a conversation, and it's very rich for me as well. So thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, and for letting me pepper you with my billions of questions.
And thank you to our audience for all these wonderful questions.
Yes,
so we're really grateful
you.
to you all for listening, and we hope you enjoyed a very nourishing chat.
Wonderful. Until the next time.
Thanks for listening, bombshells. In order to continue to elevate, subscribe and don't forget to click that little bell so you can get notified every time we have a new badass brunch. Until next time, stay focused, fierce, and fabulous.